Hey, it's Jon Justice, and welcome to The Clip Show, moments from The Jon Justice Show, which you can hear live on the Iheartradio app or Monday through Friday, 6 until 9 a.m. on Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130 and 103.5 FM. In this podcast, you'll hear from counterterrorism expert, global threat analyst, author of Bin Laden's Legacy, and CEO of Valens Global, Daveed Gartenstein-Ross. In the wake of the October 7th, 2023 Hamas terror attack on Israel, our military overseas in the Middle East has sustained some 163 attacks from Iranian-backed terrorists in the region, recently resulting in the death of 3 of our service members. I speak with Daveed about this most recent attack as we await a military response from the Biden administration. Here's my conversation with counterterrorism expert Daveed Gartenstein-Ross.
President Joe Biden told reporters on Tuesday that he had made the decision on how he plans to retaliate against the Iranian-backed terrorists in the Middle East who murdered 3 U.S. soldiers this week, wounding dozens more in a suicide attack. I have a number of different questions with you with regard to this, Daveed. First off, yesterday, the White House and Kirby during a White House press briefing, and there was some public information that came out from Central Command, and they were essentially laying out what the retaliatory response to Iran was going to be. And it seemed very detailed to me and others, almost as if we're giving a warning to our adversaries of what our intentions are, as opposed to staying silent and then carrying out whatever our actions are going to be. Is that typical? And I'm just not noticing it and others aren't noticing it? Is this a policy that's been done before? And is it a productive way to conduct these types of operations, to give out a level of detail of we're going to do, specified targets in certain regions of, and we're also going to carry out cyber attacks? I mean, there was a level of specificity to this that I found rather surprising, Daveed.
It has I don't know of an instance in which we have with such specificity outlined an operation. I can think of one thing which I would consider to be analogous, which I'll get to in a second, but it seems like one of the key things that the White House is trying to do in broadcasting our retaliatory intentions so specifically is avoid escalation. I don't think this is effective. I think that if you signal to an adversary that you don't want to escalate, it actually signals weakness. It makes you easier to hit because you're broadcasting your fear. That seems to me to be what we're doing. And it could be that I'm missing something, but that's how it seems to me on the surface. So the thing I'd analogize this to is I remember many years ago, circa 2013, Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons against rebel forces in Syria. And John Kerry really wanted to retaliate. Ultimately, kind of what the U.S. did was very minimal. There was even debate within the White House as to whether the U.S. should, had an interest in striking back at Assad after his use of chemical weapons. But I remember Kerry was trying to make the case for punishing Assad with airstrikes while at the same time avoiding escalation. And I remember you and I even talked about it at the time, John. He talked about how the airstrikes would be so small, like very small airstrikes. That was kind of the way he was selling it publicly. And, for me, I'm not at all convinced that the U.S. had an interest there in carrying out airstrikes. Let me be super clear about that. But if we did, then in advance telegraphing how small they'll be is not a way to create a deterrent to Assad using those chemical weapons again. And it seems like there's some echoes here, albeit with other angles, such as the cyber attacks angle and the like. But it seems like we're broadcasting because we fear escalation.
Well, and John Kirby was specific about that. I mean, that was one of the quotes that he had. A spokesperson for the White House National Security Council said that the president feels that we do not seek another war. We do not seek escalation. Now, this brings me to my other question, and this is I want to lay out sort of my as I typically do, talking with Daveed Gartenstein-Ross, counterterrorism expert, as I typically do in these, I want to lay out my thought process and then what I landed on, because something wasn't beyond the death of our service members over the weekend in Jordan in this Tower 22. Something about this wasn't sitting right, as there were all these calls to strike further, and even calls to strike, Iran in the wake of this. This was apparently a mistake on our part, according to the reporting, that there was another U.S. drone coming in around the same time that this Iranian-backed drone was coming in and ended up, carrying out its attack. Now, you said, first off, on that particular piece of information, how do you feel about first that assessment before I get into my question that we made a mistake with regard to this particular attack?
Well, so assuming that report is accurate, which it does sound accurate to me, what it signals to me is that Iran had been monitoring the flight patterns of our drones, and so very purposefully flew theirs in at the same time to create confusion. Do you remember, John, you and I did an interview, I think just a few weeks ago, where I talked about how close drone attacks had come to killing U.S. service members?
Mm-hmm, I do.
We'd been very close to a tragedy on multiple occasions. This is something that has been in reporting, but also underreported, right? I know from multiple sources that there have been multiple drone attacks that have come close to killing up to dozens of service members. So this is just part of a pattern of kind of escalating very sophisticated attacks with very strong drone technology. And what I would make of that report is they were watching the patterns of our drones and deliberately wanted to create confusion.
Okay, so Daveed Gartenstein-Ross, I'm so grateful to have you on to share that piece of information, because it helps in my next question in regard to this. My question still remains, but it helps in my questioning, because thinking that this was more a mistake on our part and knowing that this was more a calculated attempt by our enemies adds clarity to the question that I had, because it's not like what the enemy has been trying to do in these 160 attacks has changed. They've been trying to attack us. They've been trying to kill us. They succeeded in this point. And now you hear this escalation of calls to retaliate, where I would argue we should have been hitting back harder a long time ago, because their intention hadn't changed. So I guess with that, I'll hand it back over to you. And that's where my frustration is that I'm kind of scratching my head going, whoa, I understand we lost members of our military, and that's horrible and awful, but the dynamics have not changed. They've been wanting to do this. They just succeeded.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, the one thing that obviously there is a discussion about nationally is the extent to which we should be engaged overseas. Right. One could argue that we shouldn't be in northern Jordan. Right. That's a perfectly fine argument. There are some America First type arguments both ways on whether we should be there or not. But the fact is, if we make the decision as a country that we are going to put military forces in a particular location, in a particular region, we need to be willing to retaliate to defend them when they're attacked and not just when they're killed. So, what I'm doing there is stripping away the question of, well, we should be there, we shouldn't be there. Instead, if we are there, absolutely, we need to be willing to retaliate. Full stop.
I know we're short on time, so I think we'll probably have to ending on this particular question. But is there a response, in your opinion, that could, I know this is kind of getting into the minds of the enemy, but is there a response the U.S. could have that doesn't escalate us to the point of a direct conflict with Iran that would actually deter them from what they've been doing against us?
This gets into that interesting question you asked the other day, John, about what direct conflict is or what war is. I mean, the fact is most of our adversaries operate in a zone that's below what we consider acts of war, but can take our lives of U.S. servicemen. That's what happened here. We don't consider this an act of war, but it killed 3 of our service members. And that's the kind of attacks we tend to face. We're very uncomfortable retaliating in a similar way. You can see how uncomfortable we are with this. Is there a way, is your question? Yeah, obviously there's a way. Are we good at navigating it? No, we have difficulty doing so.
Remember to listen to the Jon Justice Show Monday through Friday, 6 until 9 a.m. on the Iheartradio app and on Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130 and 103.5 FM. Plus, if you miss any portion of the show or any show, you can check out the podcast as well on the Iheartradio app. And be sure you subscribe to this podcast to never miss an interview from my weekly radio show. Before you go, if you like to read science fiction, I hope you'll check out my science fiction space opera series, Embark. I wanted to provide an alternative to the glut of agenda-driven science fiction that's available on the market. That's one of the reasons why I wrote my 7-book science fiction series, Embark. Mostly because I love science fiction. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with sci-fi. It's written for adults, but it is great in terms of content for ages 11 plus. Again, 7 books in all in the series, available in ebook, free on Kindle Unlimited, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook, produced and narrated by me. If you're interested in purchasing paperbacks, you can certainly get them from Amazon.com, as you can the ebooks as well and the audiobooks. You can also purchase the paperbacks and hardcovers directly from me by emailing talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I'll give you all the details. You get a bit of a discount, and shipping is a lot cheaper than Amazon.com. So head on over to Amazon.com or drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. If you want more details about the books themselves, you can also go to mynerdworld.net. If you're not familiar with my science fiction stories, here's the description for book 1 in my Embark science fiction series. Taft has found something, and humanity won't survive without it. With interstellar travel possible, ship mechanic Taft Guardia prepared to one day travel the galaxy. But when an industrial accident inside a D-Corp civilian and military spacecraft factory sets off an apocalyptic chain of events, exploring the stars becomes a matter of survival. As the global evacuation begins, the ruthless Sin-Argam of D-Corp threatens to destroy every vessel not loyal to his regime. Meanwhile, fellow pilot Kate Amaro suddenly receives a cryptic message from her father, an aerospace engineer who died 1 year earlier. When Taft and Katha discover what may be the key to saving Earth's evacuees, they become unwittingly tied to the catastrophe and must solve the mystery of her father's past before it's too late. If you like to read science fiction, do not miss out on this fast-paced and action-packed epic space opera adventure. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to not miss any of the interviews from my weekly radio show. And thanks for listening.